from Chicago studios, this is the best of Muslim news on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. Let's watch the best of our news reports.
The FIFA World Cup is one of the biggest events in the world. It is happening this year in 2022. Qatar is the first Muslim country to host this tournament. Muslim players like Zinedine Zidane, Karim Benzema and Mesut Ozil have engraved their names in the history of this sport. A lot of Muslim players will be representing their countries this year, like the legendary Mohamed Salah, Sadio Mane, and Riyad Mahrez. France won the 2018 World Cup. Its team was hailed as one of the greatest teams ever. One reason the French team was appreciated so much was its diversity. It had 7 Muslim players. Paul Pogba, Ousmane Dembélé, and N'Golo Kanté are some of the biggest names in the game. French victory gave rise to a whole lot of French Muslim girls who wanted to play football as well. But unfortunately, they are being blocked. On January 18, 2022, 160 French senators voted to prohibit religious symbols within sports federations, therefore during official competitions. That will keep many Muslim girls from playing soccer. But these football-playing girls are not giving up on their dreams. This is Paris's Luxembourg Garden. It is just behind the French Senate, which is trying to block girls with hijab from sports. They are protesting their ban from sports competitions. They have even formed a union. It is called Collective Les Hijabeuses. It means a collective of headscarf-wearing soccer players. Here is Fone Diawara, co-president.
Qui pratique un sport en particulier qui est le football. Et donc encore une fois, on est...
What bothers us is that thousands of women are being left out of this sport. They exclude us, whereas the fundamental values of football and sport are to unite and to come together. We don't see why we would remove it. There is no reason, there is nothing in the law, so I don't see why we should be forced to remove it. Above all, it is something personal. There is nobody who can ask us to remove it. France must not force French Muslim girls to choose between their faith and football. This is Salha Farouk for Muslim News. A dead activist, a detained child, a demolished home. Just another day in Israel's arrogant, immoral efforts to erase Palestinian identity, life, and dignity, says the Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper. This is what is causing human rights group after human rights group to call Israel an apartheid state. Amnesty International is now calling it an apartheid. But first, it was Israel's leading human rights group B'Tselem which published a groundbreaking report in January 2021. Their report was titled, "A Regime of Jewish Supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. This is apartheid." Another Israeli group, Yesh Din, gave a legal opinion that the crime against humanity of apartheid is being committed in the West Bank. Then, in March 2021, Human Rights Watch came out with its 213-page report. It was titled, "A Threshold Crossed: Israeli Authorities and the Crimes of Apartheid and Persecution." A year ago, B'Tselem drew fire when it asserted that Israeli policies had been designed to enforce Jewish supremacy, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea and met the definition of apartheid. Now, in January 2022, Amnesty International has issued its report calling it an apartheid. Here is the Secretary General of Amnesty International, Agnes Callamard.
We are here today to call on the international community to take resolute action against the crime of humanity being perpetrated in order to maintain the system of apartheid.
The 280-page report took 4 years to write. In America, the Israeli lobby is outraged. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC, a powerful right-wing lobby organization, accused Amnesty of seeking to demonize and delegitimize the Jewish and democratic state of Israel. A Wall Street Journal editorial called it libel against Israel and claimed that Amnesty is in the company of Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. Leading Israeli politicians, however, have warned for years that their country was sliding into apartheid. They include 2 former prime ministers, Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert. But Yossi Sarid was more poetic about his assertion. He is a former Israeli minister, ex-leader of the opposition, and member of the Knesset for 32 years. In 2008, he said, "What acts like apartheid is run like apartheid and harasses like apartheid. It is not a duck, it is apartheid." Amnesty International is now accused of anti-Semitism. But Amnesty has good company here. The former U.S. President, Jimmy Carter, was called an anti-Semite for his book as well. In 2006, President Carter, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, published a book called Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. It became a New York Times bestseller. Abraham Foxman, then the national director of the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, accused Carter of engaging in anti-Semitism. This is Salaha Farouk reporting for Muslim News. This is perhaps the only one street in the world where 2 Nobel Peace Prize laureates had lived. This is Soweto, South Africa. Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Desmond Tutu both lived here. Here is Loreto, their neighbor.
He used to literally do his morning run here. So to hear of his passing this morning, it's just a big blow. As you know, that this street is the only street where in the world the 2 Nobel Peace Prize winners have lived. You can then imagine us, the neighbors around. We are really touched by his passing.
Both are no longer in this world, but both, Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Tutu, stay in the hearts of Muslims. Muslims were a part of the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. Archbishop Tutu knew what apartheid is. Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem and Human Rights Watch now call Israel an apartheid state. But the Nobel Peace Prize laureate Bishop Tutu compared Israel's treatment of Palestinians to apartheid. He even backed boycott and sanctions movements against Israel. He considered Palestine as God's own cause.
People of Palestine for freedom from humiliation, from persecution, from the unjust policies of Israel. That is something that is unstoppable because it is a righteous cause. It is a righteous cause. It is God's own cause.
He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in 1984. As the apartheid system fell in 1994, Tutu led the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He sought to provide restorative justice. It meant compensation to survivors and amnesty to perpetrators who cooperated with the inquiry. Tutu became the voice of the oppressed. He spoke up for Rohingya people in Burma. When the Burma Task Force launched its campaign for Rohingya people, he came forward. At the request of Maung Zani and Imam Malik Mujahid, he said what Rohingyas face in Burma is a textbook case of genocide. It was years before the rest of the world started considering it a genocide. In 2015, Muslims faced genocide in the Central African Republic. Almost all of the 436 mosques in that country were destroyed. Christian militias were killing Muslims. The world remained silent, but Archbishop Tutu warned them of genocide. He was the only one to use the term genocide to define what was happening. Tutu opposed the invasion of Iraq. He called for former US President George W. Bush and former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair to face prosecution at the International Criminal Court over their invasion and occupation of Iraq. He cared for all.
His legacy will be his love for all people. I don't know whether have you come across his writings. He has always said that God is not God of Christians. God is God of all people. So his main legacy is his love for all God's people.
He chose the cheapest available coffin as he opposed lavish spending. Thank you, Bishop Tutu. Thank you. This is Salha Farouk for Muslim News.
Coming up next after the break is the best of our Muslim News in-depth analysis. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me.
you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Open up your eyes.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
Welcome back. It's time for the best of our Muslim news analysis. Let's watch.
Thank you, Samana. 10 people were murdered in Buffalo, New York, because of pure racist manifesto, which President Biden calls race-based terrorism. Now a report is saying that hate crimes are up by 39% in big cities. Big cities? That's the question. And the author of the report is with us, Professor Brian Levin. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Levin is Executive Director, Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University. So please share with us, what are the salient features of your findings?
Thank you so much for having me on, and salam to all my friends in the Muslim community. They have been such partners with us in fighting hate here in the United States and around the world, so thank you. So some really big things. Interestingly, for the Muslim American community in particular, there's good news. A lot of this replacement doctrine garbage, unfortunately, started with being directed against Muslims, as we've seen this horrible kind of string of attacks. Obviously, New Zealand is the one that applies most directly to the Muslim community. And what was interesting, I think, is that last decade, 2015, 2016, and 2017, we saw this big spike, this what we call a head and shoulders top, with regard to anti-Muslim hate crime. And while anti-Muslim hate crime did not top the levels that we saw right after 2001, what we did see was more assaults in 2016 and 17 than during that time. But then, as violent Salafist jihadist attacks here in the United States, which we use as kind of this wedge catalyst to identify all Muslims of goodwill as somehow being involved with ISIS or similar groups, that declined. So what we saw, interestingly enough, is that these kinds of events really virtually disappeared. What I mean is extremist incidents involving Muslims here in the United States. So then what happened was the same replacement doctrine was then directed against Jews in 2018, Latinos the same year, and then Latinos again, and now blacks. Interestingly, hate crimes since that mid-decade peak, according to FBI data, really came down against Muslims, and it continued to fall, thank goodness, through 2019 and 2020. So by 2020, interestingly enough, look at the shift. We had the highest number of anti-black attacks that we've seen since 2008, when President Obama was having some political victories. But anti-Muslim hate crimes fell and hit their lowest level since the 9/11 time, and that's generally been the case. But it's not because those bigots who don't like Muslims suddenly like Muslims. They just redirected to the shiniest object in the room. In other words, immigration involving Latinos. Or in 2020, what we saw was blacks as some kind of group that was burning down our neighborhoods with these social justice protests, which, by the way, were 94% nonviolent. And then we saw a direction towards Asians as well. So the other is still Muslim, but the hot button around where bigotry should be directed. Bigotry can be defined by both the depth, but also the direction. And while Muslims are still in that constellation of villains along with Jews and blacks and socialists and even Democrats, the central focus is now more on Asians, Jews, and blacks than it is on Muslims. But here's the problem. When we see disputes going on internationally, it often reverberates back here in North America. One other quick thing, though. In Canada, we have seen some terrible attacks, of multi-fatality attacks in those recent years. So not every country is in lockstep. And in Europe, unfortunately, we see attacks against Muslims. So what's interesting is you really have to check your local listings. In other words, each country is different. What I found so interesting is Canada, which is in many ways, when you look at polls, a more tolerant country. That's where we've seen at least two in the last several years, multi-fatality anti-Muslim attacks. So unfortunately, what will happen is when the attention is being paid to some kind of dispute or conflict overseas, then we might very well see social media and broadcast players who in recent years were picking on Muslims and now have decided to go on to other groups to circle back and attack Muslims as well. And when we have 146 major conflicts going on worldwide, we know that's going to reverberate back here, including most recently, we've seen like Ukraine-Russia, a trickling of Ukraine-Russia kind of things. So that's kind of where we're at. We had a little bit of a pause, but it might be the eye of the storm as opposed to the storm moving all the way through.
Professor Levin, it is not of much comfort that Muslims are not a direct target of this hate, because hate continues to rise. I remember the first time I was subject of the hate, people was the person next to me. Thank God, was being restrained by some people who were calling me Hindu. I didn't spare any moment explaining to him that I'm not a Hindu. Hate is a hate wherever it is go. But your research says that hate is rising 39% in the major cities. Now, major cities are where there's more acceptance, more tolerance, and more hubs of liberalism. Why major cities are seeing the rise of hate?
That is a great point. And let me point out, by the way, again, it varies from region to region. You go to India, look at the terrible hate crimes that are going on against Muslims there. Okay, so I don't want to say like, hey, everywhere.
That one probably is no longer a hate crime. Scholars, Holocaust Museum considered to be at high risk of mass killings there, and Genocide Watch considered that to be at the 8th or the 9th stage of the genocide, 10th being the final one. So that has gone beyond a hate. That is just a very different story.
Absolutely, but what I'm saying to you is that impacts hate crime numbers as well. That gives us a data point. But absolutely, and that's why each country will vary. But the problem is these stereotypes are still there. These stereotypes that label Muslims as a threat are still there. What is not there is the immediate catalyst to get folks acting aggressively in for instance, the U.S. cities as opposed to, for instance, in India and elsewhere, which it's all over the country in India. But with respect to your question, here's what we've been seeing. Oftentimes, the hardcore, hard racist right looks at what we call the liberal blue, meaning Democrat, major cities as places to make a stand. And what we've seen is most recently that carousel. Interesting enough, listen to this. When anti-Muslim was going up last decade, in the middle of last decade, anti-Black as a proportion of all hate crimes was going down. At the same time that anti-Muslim hate crimes as a proportion of all hate crimes was going up. So we had a little bit of a realignment, and that occurred after the COVID restrictions took place. We saw the social justice protests occur, and we saw a big increase in 2020 in attacks against Blacks. June 2020 was the worst month for anti-Black hate crime for as long as we've been keeping data. December 2015 was the third worst month, next to the ones in 2001, for anti-Muslim hate crime. And I just wrote a whole chapter in a book about Islamophobia on this trend with anti-Muslim hate crime. So in the major cities, what we've seen is the groups that are considered legitimate targets of aggression because of these fearful stereotypes and these conspiracies, which previously labeled Muslims as violent threats, are now labeling Blacks as these kind of threats. And it's not just with regard to violence. Then it went into Blacks are stealing the election. And then it went into Blacks are changing our culture and invading our schools with critical race theory. So as long as you have a hot button issue that you can tie a group to, even indirectly, you'll see that happen. And one other thing, hate crimes against Jews are soaring as well. In 2019, the three largest cities in the United States, Jews were the number one target. Then we saw a switch to Asians and Blacks and Asians, and now Jews are coming back in again. And so what we've seen is that these stereotypes have a constellation of villains, and the ones that are on stage now are Blacks, Asians, and Jews, with Muslims as a backstage target as soon as something can viscerally get to people's fears. And can I just interject one quick thing? I interviewed a fellow who who was the first person to commit an anti-Muslim hate crime in the United States after the Paris terror attacks, and he had said he was drinking and he was watching a lot of television which labeled Muslims in these stereotypical ways. So we have to be careful about the imagery and the stereotyping that label particular groups as targets for aggression. Right now, that targeting is on Blacks, Asians, and Jews, and less so on Muslims, but that can easily switch if there's some event or some change in conditions in politics. Real quick, just bear with me. In the last time we had a conflictual midterm election here in the United States, which was October 2018, that was the second worst year for hate crime last decade. First was November 2016, the presidential election time. And what we saw, interestingly, is initially the main target during the summer, right, on television and online, were Latino caravans. By the time we went into election time, it was Jews. So we had also the worst month for Jews later in the year, whereas with Latinos, it was earlier in the year because these stereotypes that label the other can metastasize to include different groups. And what I'm afraid of, particularly now that replacement theory is being talked about, the initial target of replacement theory, both in the book, Le Grand Replacement, and by some of these terror attackers, were Muslims. So what I'm saying is, yes, I'm very happy that the average bigot is not attacking Muslims as much. But for the most hardcore homicidal ones, Muslims are considered an existential threat along with Jews and Blacks. And that's why we still have to, particularly in a very highly charged election season, make sure that we reach out to all communities here in the United States where they live and in the languages they speak so that they report the hate crimes when they occur.
Now, for Muslims, one can, as you mentioned, someone you interviewed, and he was watching TV against Muslim news and things like that. But Asians, you can say that foreign policy towards China being competitive may have created the environment. What is facilitating hate towards Jews? Negative news about Jews is not as high as does it point out to the prominence of social media where it is spreading more than the mainstream media?
It's not a great question, by the way. Here's the thing with Jews. Because Jews are very active in civic life in the United States, by the way, and it's a wonderful thing, just as Muslims are now coming into their own with respect to that, which is a wonderful thing. They are identified as groups that hold the levers of power. So, for instance, the Tree of Life terrorist who killed 11 Jews at a synagogue hated Latinos, but his hate for Jews was different because he accused the Jews of being responsible for all the Latinos coming in. And what is so interesting, oftentimes we see people who hate Muslims also hate Jews because they believe that Jews are allowing Muslims to flourish in civic and cultural life here in the United States. So in other words, a lot of times the default group, no matter what the dispute is, always comes down to Jews. And unfortunately, even in some parts, just as we have people who are Islamophobes in the Jewish community, we also have anti-Semites in the Muslim community who promote these kinds of stereotypes. I am not saying that all Muslims or all Jews do this, but what I'm saying to you is these conspiracy theories spread across different groups that you would think would not hook into it.
Do you think that, from the racism and racist conversations, these anti-Semites and Islamophobes in the respected communities, do you think they borrow terminology and ideas from right-wing nationalists?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what I'm saying to you is it could have, and by the way, this fellow who wrote this manifesto, a large part of it was about Jews. So what I am concerned about is that, all people of goodwill are in the same boat. And I want to let my Muslim friends know this, that we devote a tremendous amount of our research and resources to countering anti-Muslim hate. And you want to hear something? When I did research about anti-Muslim hate, and it was publicized back in 2015, a target appeared on my chest online as part of an article that had come out in a nationally syndicated piece that said I was kind of making this stuff up, when it turned out later on our data was reconfirmed by the FBI. So the bottom line is, when people are promoting and exploiting fear, they will not just include one group, but a series of interconnected groups. And that's why what I'm concerned about is, while we have a quiescent period right now with regard to anti-Muslim hate crime, as we've seen since 9/11, it can go down and then boom. If the atmospherics change, it can go up again. And that's why I speak at mosques and I reach out to all my dear friends in the Muslim community. And my dean, God bless him, who is Muslim, has been so supportive of our work. And I want my friends to know that you are not alone, that the good people of America stand with you, and that even when hate crimes go down, what we see is those stereotypes that label Muslims as some kind of enemy, those are still relatively high. So in other words, I guess what I'm saying is the dry kindling is there, but the gasoline hasn't been thrown on it yet. And we're hoping that does not change. But when we look at politics, and particularly when it's xenophobic, and particularly when we have the rise of what's called Christian nationalism, and people are running on that kind of formula, Muslims as a target are not far away from that. All that's needed is some kind of catalyst, some spark. And that's what I'm concerned about, because the atmospherics now that label the other, immigrants, non-Christians, as some kind of existential enemy of America, is still out there. Also, unfortunately, Muslims, while it's come down a little bit, continue to be the most disfavored group in the United States. That kind of bounce around between atheists and Muslims in the United States, and we have to work on education with that. And that's why I'm so happy to work with my dear friends in the Muslim American community, both here and in Canada, to approach this. Because what we know is when people get educated and have meaningful contact with people who are different and find commonalities, we know that prejudice that is the fuel to this hate crime declines.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Levin, for your time and for your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we stand with all our friends in the Muslim American community. Salam. And as long as I'm running this center, we will make sure that we will counter Islamophobic hate. And I encourage folks to look at a new book by Oxford University Press, which is just about Islamophobia. And I was happy to participate in it.
Thank you. Back to you, Samana.
That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.